Folks, we are extremely lucky today. We have Alan Gottlieb, the founder of the Second Amendment Foundation, and how lucky are we to have one of the greatest advocates for the right to keep and bear arms in American history, certainly in modern history. I could not be more excited to talk to Alan about all the different issues and for him to discuss some of his recent activities, which you're going to want to listen to. Very exciting stuff coming up in just 1 minute. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gunner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and best-selling author. If you have not subscribed to the Four Boxes Diner Second Amendment channel, please do so, and feel free to follow us on Twitter at Four Boxes Diner. We've now gone into these different social media outlets because we're trying to spread the word about this channel to get the word out to make sure that intelligent, smart, and accurate scholarship and information about the Second Amendment can be available to all of us. Okay. Alan Gottlieb, I am so excited you are here. Alan Gottlieb is the founder of the Second Amendment Foundation. He's the ongoing boss of the organization. And Alan, welcome to the Four Boxes Diner. I am so excited you're here. I know we've talked about doing this, and I'm glad we finally have made this happen.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you also for all your kind words. It's really great to be with you. Thank you, Mark.
Well, why don't we just start from the beginning? I'm going to ask some silly questions because I think all of our viewers know all about you and your fantastic organization, the Second Amendment Foundation. But I think, for those of you who are just tuning in, maybe don't know as much, why don't you tell us a little bit about what is the Second Amendment Foundation and what does it do?
Well, we started in 1974, so we've now been around quite a long while. And the foundation basically was America's first 501c3 nonprofit foundation dealing with public education, research, publishing, and legal action defending Second Amendment rights. And over the years, we're now responsible for about 80% of the case law that's been won in the courts defending Second Amendment rights. So today, when anybody files a lawsuit, so to speak, when they look at their citations that they're citing, they have to cite a lot of our cases.
Well, that is certainly the case. And let me ask you this, Alan, right now, in your view, should gun owners be optimistic, pessimistic? How should they view the current climate when it comes to our right to keep and bear arms right now? You've been in this since the 70s, so what do you think?
Well, that's a hard question to answer, Mark, because quite frankly, in some areas, we should be extremely optimistic, particularly in what gains we've made in the courts. And then on the other hand, we need to be extremely pessimistic with the current administration in Washington, D.C., who really wants to prohibit firearms ownership. So it goes two ways. And we do have a 50-50 nation. And, a few votes one way or the other can shift gun rights tremendously in one direction or the other. So I tend to be cautiously optimistic and cautiously pessimistic at the same time.
Well, when you started the Second Amendment Foundation, we had, as I recall, one state that had permitless carry, sometimes referred to as constitutional carry, and now I think we have 25 and growing. What is your take on this growth, this tremendous growth in constitutional carry or permitless carry?
Well, it's been quite a victory for gun rights all across the country. A lot of people have always said, I don't need a permit. You shouldn't have to have a permit to exercise the constitutional right. And with 25 states now saying that you don't need a permit to carry, that's a lion's shift. And once we get to half, it's amazing. But of course, those tend to be red states, not the so-called blue states controlled by liberal Democrats. Half our population or so is really under the thumb of people who want to regulate and control gun owners to the extent to make it next to impossible to have a firearm to defend yourself. So it's been great to watch that happen. But it's still a long battle, and it's going to be hard fought. And again, it's a 50-50 nation. It can go either way very quickly.
Well, as they've always said, freedom is not free. Right now, Alan, as you sit here, really in the catbird seat, because you really kind of see it all from where you're perched. Where do you see the major substantive fights going on with gun rights, the Second Amendment right now? What are the hot button issues that you feel are the priority? I know that for several years after we had the Heller decision and the McDonald decision that we had an individual right to have guns in our home for self-defense. There was many, many years where the next big fight was on the right to carry, to make sure that the right to bear was interpreted as the right to carry guns outside the home for self-defense. And now, after NYSERDA versus Bruin, that has been achieved. So my question, Alan, is, in light of where we are now, what are the next sort of major achievements that the gun rights movement should be, looking to accomplish?
Well, let me back up a little before I exactly answer that question. The Bruin decision was a great victory for gun rights, obviously for the right to carry, but it also went further by getting rid of the so-called two-part test that's determining if you can win a case in court, so to speak, on Second Amendment grounds, making a one-part test on just the plain text of the amendment and the history of it. But we're now seeing, though, a lot of anti-gun rights politicians trying to get around that Bruin decision by saying, okay, you have a right, we have to give you a permit, we're just going to make sure the permit's not good anyplace. So we're going to make all of America, so to speak, a sensitive place where you can't have a gun. To the extent, one of the things that sticks in my throat right now is in New York City, as an example, they've made the whole Times Square area, the heart of Manhattan, a sensitive place. And if you already had a permit, a premises permit, to have a gun, say, in your jewelry store because you're in Midtown Manhattan, to protect yourself and your property, now you can't even have the permit. They want to take your permit away and make sure you turn your gun over to to the government because they don't want you can't have it because it's a sensitive area now. So on one hand, we won. We gained ground, and now they're trying to take it away from us. So this whole area of the sensitive place argument is going to be a significant thing in litigation that's already been started. We just filed a suit in New York State over their law that they just passed. So that's one area that we still have to backtrack still on, even though we won. And then in answer to your question, where are we going with this? The next areas, the important ones, are going to be, the so-called banning of semi-automatic firearms that they're trying to, they label assault weapons, and also what, standard capacity magazines. If they hold over 10 rounds, they're trying to ban those all over the place. Those are the two next area of suits that I think are going to be moving and probably get to the U.S. Supreme Court.
What do you think, Alan, about these two pending bump stock cases, which I know, as from our viewers on this channel, they're very intelligent. I know that. They understand that the bump stock cases that are pending before the Supreme Court, and we don't know whether or not cert will be granted. We don't know if the Supreme Court will hear those cases. But those cases are technically not Second Amendment cases. They really speak to the authority of the ATF and the authority of these unelected bureaucrats in Washington to be able to promulgate regulations, which are really laws not passed by Congress, but that's what they did. That's how they banned bump stocks, through regulations. What is your take on where those two bump stock cases pending before the Supreme Court might be going, and what should our Second Amendment community be cheering for?
Well, we should cheer that the court takes the cases and overturns the government saying they don't have the authority to make those rulings without an act of Congress. The bureaucrats can't just, or the administration can't just, willy-nilly redefine what a firearm is, making it an accessory, a firearm. But again, I think it's really important because not only is this administration trying to redefine what a firearm is with bump stocks, they're trying to do it with other things as well, arm braces. They're trying to do it in other areas of firearms, regulating the industry that way as well. So this ruling could be very far-reaching and protect us in a lot of other ways, and that's why I'm hoping the court would take it. I have no idea if they will or not. It's all hypothetical. It's hard to project. But this is, again, an area of government overreach that's happened not just with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, but other agencies as well. So the Supreme Court might very well be interested in taking this case, not just to stop the ban on so-called bump stocks, but to stop the government from overreaching in lots and lots of areas that have nothing to do with firearms.
Now, Alan, there's something out there called the Chevron Doctrine that often gets discussed. It's one of these things that, legal geeks like us, we might talk about and whatnot. It's extremely important for ordinary Americans' rights and liberties, and yet it's one of these things that kind of gets buried in the discussions of legal academics and high-end lawyers and whatnot. Do you want to explain to the audience a little bit about what the Chevron doctrine is, or I should say the Chevron deference doctrine, where you defer to these administrative agencies if you're a court?
Yeah, I've always had a problem with, Congress passes laws and they give all this authority to agencies without saying what the authority really is or what the outcome's going to be or what their Congress's intent really was. And when courts defer to this, and you say, oh, well, the agencies just get to do it. that's very, very dangerous to me. And so this is an area I think that needs a significant more review and Supreme Court action to change the dynamics a little bit. So hopefully that'll happen in our lifetime.
Yes, I cannot agree more. I mean, this notion that courts that swear an oath to uphold the Constitution and to apply the Constitution honestly. I remember as a kid, the old cartoons on Saturday mornings, how a bill becomes, what is a bill on Capitol Hill? Remember all those rhymes and cartoons and songs? I don't ever recall anything about regulations or the administrative state in those songs. And somehow here we are. So I cannot agree more than, look, regulators have a role potentially to regulate, provided that Congress tells them what to do. But the idea that regulators can make up laws under the guise of interpretations is simply absurd. And I hope the Supreme Court, they seem to be inclined to cut back on these powers. There's a lot of evidence of that. Let's hope that they step up and do that. I have a feeling that that may be coming very soon. Only time will tell. So, Alan, you have a very interesting theory and a very interesting case pending involving reparations for people in New York City that were denied concealed carry permits, but apparently who became subsequently victims of crimes. Tell us a little bit about this notion of reparations in New York City.
Well, it's a little tongue-in-cheek to some extent. We have a lot of people who are anti-gun rights on the other side. You're talking about reparations for all kinds of things. Well, so let's put gun rights on the table as well. And, if you became a victim of a crime or a family member of somebody who did become a victim of a crime and lost a loved one because they weren't able to legally get a firearm or carry one to protect themselves and other family members, why shouldn't the government be held responsible? If you deny me a right and I get injured because you denied me a right, why shouldn't you be responsible for paying for damages? And so we've raised this issue in New York as a pushback because New York doesn't seem to get the message from the Bruin decision that there are a lot of victims over their past anti-gun laws that they've had in place that got taken out. The courts ruled that you had a right to have that firearm to protect yourself. So now we want to make the governments pay.
Alan, that theory is not that crazy because if you just take long-standing federal law, and we talk a lot about on this channel, the fact that the notion of police have a duty to protect us from criminals is simply not true. Police and government have no legal duty to protect you and I from criminals who hurt us. The only exception to that, Alan, I think this speaks very strongly to your notion. The one exception where police or government has a duty to protect us is basically if they've taken us into custody, if they've taken control of us and says, you got to come with us, you got to be in the back of the squad car, we're going to put you in prison because now we control you. And now basically they're saying, hey, we will be responsible for your well-being and safety because we've taken you in. And it seems to me that if you're denying people the right to carry guns, you're essentially saying, we don't want you to carry a gun to protect yourself because we're going to take on the legal responsibility to do it for you. Well, I don't know. That certainly has some resonance with me. The good news is I think, though, a lot of these sensitive places, which are euphemisms for gun-free zones, I have a feeling a lot of these are going to get struck down by the courts based upon some of the clear language of the U.S. Supreme Court, but only time will tell. Now, Alan, you have a very big set of events. I appreciate you taking some time today because you're extremely busy, not just with all your litigations and all your scholarship and all your writings, but you got some big work because you're hosting some major conferences down there in the Lone Star State of Texas. Tell us a little bit about what's coming up with those conferences.
Yeah, we have coming up next weekend, not this current weekend, but in September 30th, October 1-2 area. We have two conferences. Actually, it's three. One of them has made a lot of publicity. Let me start with that one first. We have something called AmCon, which is a conference for people who are involved in new media that have podcasts, that have radio shows, that blog on the internet, how to be more effective in training them to get the message word out on gun rights a whole lot more. And then a very important one we have coming up is our Legal Scholars Conference, which you're going to be emceeing it. Thank you very much for doing that, with about 50 noted attorneys and journalists that report on gun litigation to go over everything that's going on these days in gun rights in the courts. It's going to be a very important conference, and it's booked out. We had to turn some people away because it just don't have enough facilities to handle more. To go over some recent past litigation, some history, of litigation, and stuff coming up that we have to play with in the courts in the future. And so it's really an important conference because it plots things out, and the networking is really important because these attorneys very seldom get to see each other or talk with each other. Some of them don't even know each other, and they're all out there on the front lines in battleground, in courts, from state courts to federal courts. And so I'm really excited about these Legal Scholars Conference coming up. And then we have our Gun Rights Policy Conference, our major annual conference. We have 500 key activists from all across the country who deal with protecting Second Amendment rights on a state, local, and federal basis. All the major national gun rights groups have people that are represented there. I think there's like 70 speakers speaking over a 2-day period with it. And these conferences are all, actually the Gun Rights Policy Conference information your viewers can get at saf.org. Registration is free. We still have some places for some people. So saf.org if you're interested in seeing what the Gun Rights Policy Conference is about, who some of the speakers are, and the networking. It's really where we plot the strategy for the gun rights movement for the upcoming year.
That's great. And what I'll make a point of doing is when we release this video, which we'll do quickly, I'll make a point to make sure that all that information is down below in the description. So folks, if you're down there in Texas, is it in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Alan?
Yeah, it's at the Westin Hotel at the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. So it's conveniently located to the whole Dallas-Fort Worth area. But people are flying in from all over. There's still a few hotel rooms people can get there on premises as well. So, and again, the conference is free. We charge nothing for it. We provide meals and breaks and snacks and everything. So I'd love to have some of your viewers attend. Thank you.
That'd be great. So, Alan, when you started the Second Amendment Foundation in the 1970s, did you ever imagine that the Second Amendment movement and that your organization would become what it became? Did you ever say to yourself, hey, in a few decades, we're going to have this tremendous success and advance the right to keep and bear arms in a way that has really been incredible? When you started it, where did you think you were going to wind up?
Well, I think it was started with a lot of passion and not a whole lot of belief that we'd really be that successful. When we first started, one of our goals was someday to get a case to the United States Supreme Court. Now, of course, there have been 3 major ones that are there. And what I really believed about when we first started that we'd be successful, probably not, because quite frankly, back in the early 1970s when we started, there was really only one case that dealt with the right to keep and bear arms that was one that was major. And it wasn't even a federal case. It was in the state of Oregon. And it was the Oregon State Supreme Court. And believe it or not, it didn't even involve a gun. It involved a knife. And the Oregon Supreme Court ruled that the right to keep and bear arms provision, giving you an individual right in Oregon to have arms, included knives to use for self-defense. And that case was won, and that was about the only thing that was out there. You couldn't find law review articles that supported the individual right to keep and bear arms. So we started up our very first Legal Scholars Conference at Boston University with about 25, scholars and attorneys to plot out what we needed to do to ever get a case to the U.S. Supreme Court, building the foundation, getting the academic work done in academic journals, law review articles. And boy, it was a lot of work for a lot of years. And I'm just really proud that, thank God, it's paid out in spades for gun owners, and we've been able to advance the football down the field.
So, Alan, tell us a little bit about the Second Amendment Foundation's experiences before the U.S. Supreme Court. I think they should hear it from the horse's mouth, in a sense.
Well, I got a couple interesting stories that I love. We didn't bring the Heller case, but our attorney, Alan Gore, is who argued it. And we knew we were going to win it. And we pre-set up ahead of time a second case to file the day we won it. I remember when we won it, that it was a very great day in my life. We won that case, and we're coming down the steps from the U.S. Supreme Court with Mr. Otis McDonald, who was an African American who moved from Mississippi to Chicago and was our plaintiff. And we're walking down the stairs, and Otis stopped me and says, Alan, I need to thank you and the Second Amendment Foundation. My mother said, when she sent me to Chicago, she said, go there and make your mama proud. And thanks to you and the foundation, I've made my mama proud. And I was in tears, and then we walked down this all the way down the flight of stairs, and Alan Gore and I, and we let the media know we're filing a second suit. I'm sorry, that was Otis McDonald, the McDonald suit to the media. I mean, we did that from the Heller case coming down the stairs. I mean, and then the Otis, we won that suit. And the day we won the Otis suit, we actually announced we're filing another suit the same day. It was known as Bateman versus Purdue, which challenged the North Carolina Emergency Powers Act that said if a snowstorm or hurricane, you couldn't buy guns or ammunition, and you couldn't even take your gun out of your own home, even to be on your own porch to defend your property with in case of of looters. And we won that case, and then it just took off from there. But the individual experience, like with an Otis McDonald, I realized this isn't just about law or something esoteric. This is really about people. And defending people rights was just really important, and it's just taken off from there. And the individual stories with the individual plaintiffs who have great stories to tell, and the lives we've impacted have been so important that it's really made it all worthwhile.
Well, there's no doubt that your work with Otis McDonald gave rise to the McDonald decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, which applied the Second Amendment to the states and localities, a tremendously huge victory. And, both you and Mr. McDonald are great American heroes. I believe Mr. McDonald has unfortunately passed away, but he was the man, and we cannot thank him enough here in the Second Amendment community. So, Alan, it's interesting. The anti-gun community, the anti-gun movement, in my view, likes to kind of portray themselves as sort of civil rights activists. They like to have these big events in Washington on the Mall, and they like to have these events and speakers. But if you really think about it, they're really kind of the anti-civil rights movement, right? They're really trying to side with government, expand the power of government over our lives, notwithstanding the fact that you have a text-based Second Amendment that says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So it seems to me, like you said with your discussion with Mr., about you and Mr. McDonald, the Second Amendment movement, the gun rights movement, is really the legitimate civil rights, civil liberties movement in the United States when it comes to guns. Is that fair to say?
I think it's more than fair to say, not to disparage any other civil rights or civil liberties, but it's interesting that some of those people who push civil liberties, do it, under the guise of making government more powerful and giving you less individual rights, but at the same time they want to ignore the Second Amendment and Second Amendment rights as a constitutional or civil right. And we've stepped in. The Second Amendment Foundation has stepped into that fold to make sure that we're sort of like the ACLU for gun rights. And it's really, really very important because, quite frankly, without the Second Amendment, which is the teeth in our Bill of Rights, there's nothing there to support the rest of the document. And if you shred the Bill of Rights or you unravel it by saying the Second Amendment doesn't count, you really knock in the whole Bill of Rights and unraveling every right and freedom we have. And so that's why I've dedicated my life to this, because it's really that important.
I could not agree more. Without the Second Amendment, none of the other rights matter. Justice Scalia used to talk about that having a Bill of Rights on paper means absolutely nothing. The best Constitution ever written arguably was the Constitution of the Soviet Union, but of course it was completely irrelevant because it was written down on paper and there was no way to enforce it or to protect it in any respect. And certainly here in the United States, one of the reasons why our rights remain, why we have liberties, is not because we have a Constitution or a Bill of Rights, as I see it. It's because there's ways to effectuate it. There's ways to make it real, to actually have, rights that go along with remedies and remedies that go along with rights, and the ability to protect it in a way that the Soviets did not have. So it's not about the paper rights. It's about being able to protect them in the real world. And when it comes to that, I would say, Alan, your work with the Second Amendment Foundation is a major cog, is a major instrument in protecting all of our rights, not just to the Second Amendment, but to all of our rights as American citizens. And, I cannot thank you enough, and I'm sure the viewers watching this cannot thank you enough for all your work with the Second Amendment Foundation. And Alan Gottlieb, thank you so much for joining us here at the Far Boxes Diner. We appreciate all you do. We hope you come back and visit us again soon. And in the meantime, Godspeed to you and all your excellent Second Amendment work going forward.
Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you shortly. Thank you.
Orders up. Table 2A.